I went to the neurologist on Friday.
How'd that go?
All right, I'm gonna go get an MRI, and then she wants me to get off this medication that I'm on that has all these terrible side effects, and put me on a different medication that has a whole different set of terrible side effects, including your toes and fingers can turn blue.
But like harmlessly blue?
I don't know. They can just turn blue. I'm a little worried about what causes them to turn blue.
Acute death. Yeah, one of the things I wanted to talk about, but I didn't really do a whole bunch of math in preparation for it, is Elon Musk's really dumb suborbital transport claims. I can tell from your face you think there's some dumbness in it too.
I feel like it's not even worth wasting a podcast on.
Oof.
I mean, anybody. So there's two things. One is anyone who is listening to our podcast should be a smart engineer and understand like it's really a stupid idea and not feasible. The other thing is
They should just know that. Not everyone's done the research. Hey, maybe you're a smart, I don't know, chemical engineer and you didn't do a bunch of math around this and whatever. You just read some articles. It's fair enough, right?
I think the more interesting thing is that it underscores what he does with a lot of things is he comes up with some wild idea that is scientifically plausible but economically impossible. So you can capture a lot of people who don't have strong scientific backgrounds and you can fool them into thinking, oh, this can be done. And as long as they're not that well educated in science, they can continue to believe that and they'll think, oh man, he's a really smart guy. He came up with this really cool idea and this could be the future. And then you'll have all these other engineering and science people who can look at this with the proper amount of skepticism and experience and knowledge and say, no, that's actually totally bullshit. And these untrained people will say, no, you're just jealous and hate him. There's something wrong with you.
You're so jelly. Yeah, I feel like it's like the modern version of the covers of Popular Mechanics from many decades ago, where they would always feature these fantastical transport mechanisms, and it'd have a bunch of families like having a picnic on their flying platform, and there's other families in the background or something like that. And they're like, is this the future of cars? And I mean, now we know that it never was. The future of cars is just slightly better cars doing the same thing that they've always done. And he's like, maybe we'll do suborbital transport and it'll cost the same as a plane ticket. And that was the claim that really set me off. The second I heard about that, I was talking to some other coworkers and I was like, all right, let's look that up. So I went and looked up how much fuel does the BFR booster use? How much does the fuel cost? And then they were like, oh, conveniently, here's the price figure. So, and then I was like, how many people are going to go on it? 100. So if you divide 100 people by the fuel cost, you end up at something like, what was it? I think it was like $2,200 per person. Oh, they have 1,100 tons of propellant.
Is it just LOX hydrogen?
No, I think it's, what do they call it? Densified natural gas and liquid oxygen.
Okay.
And densified, I guess, means it's cooled to nearly a solid temperature cryogenically, and I guess that makes it denser. Yeah, I can't find the figure. There was something that said how much it cost, but the cost was, it was non-trivial, and it would end up with every passenger needing to pay for 11 tons of propellant themselves. And it's not that cheap. Like, I mean, you could just imagine the part of a truck that has 11 tons of propellant. You're like, can I buy that for the price of an airline ticket? And it's like, probably not. And that's just the fuel. And I know Elon Musk is like, oh, we're going to get the cost down to where it's just fuel. And that's all we're going to do. But obviously, you have to maintain the rocket. You have to make sure it's flight ready. You have to maintain the launch facility. You have to boat people out to the launch pad that's supposedly in the ocean somewhere. You have to maintain a landing facility. And you probably have to pay some kind of bribe to local governments. They'll be like, oh, you have to pay a launching fee or something like that, but it'll amount to a bribe. And all those costs are going to add up, and it's going to, like, it will be technically possible, but it's never going to be possible for only $2,000 per ticket. And that's the kind of price range that I think it would need to be competitive, because the Concorde offered faster travel than regular jets and at a premium, but the premium was too high for the amount of fastness that you got.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same problem as with Hyperloop. You give all these rosy figures and you come up with a concept that's not especially prohibited by technology, but anybody with any serious experience in vacuum systems or trains or anything like that just pokes holes in it like crazy. And you start looking at realistic costs and you start getting estimates like LA to San Francisco costing $60 billion to build the track.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's in an earthquake area. And it's like, well, what are you going to do the first time you have an earthquake and then there's a shift in the tunnel? You can't just like put a little jog in the tunnel to get back on because the thing travels so fast. You have to have very, very gradual curves. So you have to rebore long sections of tunnel.
Were they planning to put the tunnel underground?
There were different ideas. So there's the underground idea, which its major downside is you have to bore this giant ass tunnel. And then there's let's put it up in the air. And the problem with that is you have solar heating issues. So the top of the tunnel gets heated by the sun and the bottom's not. And then it starts looking like a banana. And you have expansion issues where the expansion is different on the top of the tube than it is on the bottom. And you have to figure out all these clever ways to handle that. So you have to have tons of expansion joints in this vacuum system that's hundreds of kilometers long.
What if I put like a big hat on it to protect it from the sun? Or hundreds of miles of umbrellas?
I'm not sure if that makes the idea less stupid or not.
A bunch of sombreros. It seems like you could actually put some kind of roof over it, and then you'd get a much more consistent temperature on the bottom. But yeah, it just keeps adding problems. If you had some kind of thin roof over it, and then you suspended it from cables, that would let it shift pretty well during an earthquake, I think. And I'm sure it'd need to emergency brake to a stop regardless, but I think it'd be safer. But yeah, it's like, as you start addressing these things, each thing is like, oh, well, you just build a roof over it. And it's like times several hundred miles plus maintenance. And then it's like, and then you suspend it from cables, and it's like times 100 miles plus maintenance. And you just keep doing that a bunch of times. And by the time you have a robust system, it's not cost competitive with anything. It would work if it didn't need to be safe and it didn't need to work twice.
And you never had to show a profit or pay back the money you spent building it.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that's kind of the situation. I do wonder, though, like, is it better to make these claims? Like, yeah, we're going to seriously do suborbital flight. And then I'm going to have some designers at my company build like a 3D video of this where it's showing it happening. And I'm going to be like, yeah, this is going to really happen. Like, eventually it's going to not happen. Is that worth it? Or is it something like Musk needs to build up his brands and then the consequences later won't matter?
I think that gets into the speculative issues of what do you think his end game is? And some people think that he really is the new Messiah come to save the human race. And then some people just think he's a con man. And you really can't tell the difference.
I don't think he's a con man.
You can argue either of those pretty easily.
I don't think he's really a con man. Like, the rockets really go to space and the cars really drive on the roads and stuff. If you mean, like, economically, like, not scientifically or something, then yeah, I guess so. I guess you could still make the claim. But, I mean, so you think SpaceX is, like, one of the most important companies, right?
Potentially, yeah.
So I'm guessing in that viewpoint, you're imagining he's not a con man in terms of how he's running SpaceX, and it's not a giant con organization.
We have no idea because it's privately owned and the books are all closed.
Okay.
So we have no idea if it's profitable. It could be teetering on the verge of bankruptcy, or it could be raking in the cash like crazy. We have no idea. They don't say, and they're not forced to file anything with the SEC that we can parse to figure it out.
So you think it's either the most important company of the 21st century or a con?
It could be either, and you wouldn't know.
That's a very broad spectrum.
It's not a spectrum, it's either endpoint.
Well, I think it'll just end up being a company that doesn't ultimately matter a whole lot. Like, why can't other companies just copy some of the innovations that they make and then launch rockets also? Why couldn't GE step into the market or whatever? Or some large company with rocket ambitions buys a smaller rocket company that's not SpaceX and then poaches a bunch of SpaceX engineers and then does the same stuff. Like, SpaceX isn't building a real competitive moat around their business. They're just launching rockets. Anyone else who has a rocket can launch one. It's not like we all have SpaceX Prime subscriptions and there's a switching cost.
One could dream.
Like we're all paying $100 a year to SpaceX in order to purchase tickets. It looks like a lot more people have done the math on the BFR. It looks like as people do the math, they increase their amount of skepticism a lot. Yeah, $10 million per launch on a BFR. Okay, so if we put 100 people on it, then it's down to only $100,000 a person. That's pretty great. I bet it's better than that, but not a lot better. Maybe it could work out financially if they can pack more like 1,000 people in the rocket and everyone's just squished in there. It's just like they just pour all the people in and then they're just like, try and hang on. Some of you on the bottom are going to get squished.
It's going to be like 5Gs. Good luck.
Yeah, I saw a criticism where they said people wouldn't be able to withstand the re-entry G-forces. And I thought that was a really odd thing to criticize. I mean, obviously, they're going to expose people to an amount of Gs that is reasonable. And I don't know how that guy thought all the other astronauts got back from their various space adventures.
They're the best of the best of the best.
Yeah, the way they got back was by surviving the re-entry G-forces. So it seemed really silly to me. Also, the author was pointing out that there's all this radiation in space, but there's these magnetic belts that protect you. And I was like, okay, guy. Like, there's people who spend a year on the ISS, and it's higher than this suborbital is going to go. And I don't know what he thinks. But whatever.
Did you watch Alan tutorial?
Yeah, I did. I think you described it so well that I barely needed to watch that video. I also thought from the first half of it that it was going to be more clear cut than that. But then by the end, I realized the guy was reading, like, he was just doing his own interpretation of what happened. The guy who created Alan tutorial never came out and said, oh, yeah, you got it. That's right. So I'm not sure if that's what he intended. I wish we had more good stories from work, like software engineering things. But it's like, they're abstract, it's hard to explain. They're not catastrophic. They're never like a mechanical thing that manifests in the real world. I guess that goes with being abstract. So there's like, it's like, oh yeah, we had this system and then it crashed like a lot. Okay.
Oh man, Billy and his Vietnamese wife. Do you know this story?
No, I don't think so.
Oh boy. Billy was this nice guy I worked with at NASA. And back when I worked with him, he was in his late 50s. And he'd been an engineer his whole life. And I think he had done well. You know, he had worked for Lockheed for a long time. And I think he had saved well. And he had been in, you know, back when they had good pension plans and stuff. And I think he was well taken care of. And he was divorced, but still very well off. And he had this friend who we also worked with named Tony. And Tony was Vietnamese. And so Tony decided, hey, Billy, let's go to Vietnam. Because why not? You know, you're a single guy in your late 50s and you got nothing to do. Let's go to Vietnam. What could go wrong? So Tony and Billy go to Vietnam, and of course, Tony, being Vietnamese, he's got a bunch of family there. Mm-hmm. And so Billy decides, hey, I found out there's this place you can go to meet like young, beautiful Vietnamese women. And Tony knows what's up. It's this place you go to, and the women basically like throw themselves at you. They try to get you to marry them. And of course, the promise is like, marry me and get me a green card and take me back to the US. And like, there will be lots of sex involved. And, to these like older American men, like, I guess that sounds great. I don't know. And these are like young, I guess, attractive Vietnamese women. And so Tony knows that this is that kind of place. And he says, oh, Billy, you can't even go to this place. Like, don't go there. And Billy's like, no, no, no. I know what I'm doing. It's okay. And Tony just says, Billy, it's a bad idea. Just look, don't make any promises to anyone. Just don't make any promises. Don't sign anything. Just go and, just talk to the girls and then just leave. Just don't do anything stupid. And so Billy goes. And a couple hours later, he calls up Tony and he says, hey, Tony, I got married.
I didn't expect it to be that fast.
Yeah. But I mean, these places are like experts at this. I mean, they know how to fool you into marrying these girls, like literally in a matter of hours after you've met them. And I guess these girls pay some like very high commission to these companies, in order to be put in front of these American men and then process like the green card paperwork and stuff.
Yeah.
And so Tony, of course, Tony knows this is just like the end.
The end.
Yeah. So Billy brings this girl back home to America. And of course, first things first, I mean, she needs a car to get around in. So he buys her a new Mustang. And she needs clothes and stuff. So he takes her shopping all the time. She's like 23 or so. And, Billy's like late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So he puts her in community college because, she's got to get educated. And he's always got these pictures of her on his desk. And, she's young and attractive like you'd expect. But all the pictures are like her at the shopping mall, like he'll take a photo of her at the shopping mall and she's got all these like bags in her hands and stuff. And so eventually the highly predictable problem emerges of in every like marriage like this, where it's like, oh, your ex-wife lived in this house? I don't want to live in this house. You're going to have to buy a new house. Well, and of course, the new house has to be nicer than the current house. So then Billy, in his late 50s, now has a 30-year mortgage again. And then twice a year, she has to be taken back to Vietnam to visit her family. So when they go back to Vietnam, Billy and this girl, every person like remotely related to her comes out of the woodwork because rich Uncle Billy is there. And so there's like these huge banquet feasts for dinner every night that Billy is paying for. And we see these photos of them and it'll be like 60 people. And it's just like, there's no way all these people are related to her or related to her in any meaningful manner, like cousins, brothers, sisters, reasonable relatedness.
Yeah.
It's just like this vast network of hangers on because it's like, oh man, she's got an American husband. He must be loaded. And so he pays like $1,000 a night for dinner for like 3 weeks straight while he's out there. And then a couple times a year when new iPhones and iPads would come out, she would buy a bunch of them and ship them to her family there because they couldn't get them like on the same timetable or something like that. Like they'd be released several months later in Vietnam or something like that, or maybe they were too expensive or something. Mm-hmm. And so she would buy a bunch of them in America and ship them there. And so about the time I left NASA, Billy was in kind of the terminal stages of this, which was she was arranging to sponsor her parents coming to America to live with them. And the whole thing had just like predictably grown out of control from from this one, like, oh, I'll just go and like talk to these girls and like what could go wrong, to like probably Billy today is still working at his desk at NASA. He's probably there right now, like working overtime trying to pay for all of this with no end in sight except the sweet release of death.
Listening to this podcast.
He is a smart guy, except for that.
Maybe this is what he was hoping for. I could see a guy in his 50s who's single with a bunch of money saying, I wish I could convert some of this money into having a relationship. And it looks like he figured out a way to convert it all into having a relationship.
100% conversion. Probably like 130% conversion.
Yeah. And it sounds like this girl he married got what she wanted too. Maybe everybody's really happy with this arrangement and it just looks kind of silly externally.
Somehow I kind of doubt that Billy is really excited about this.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet that his money would have been much better spent with like a really high dollar call girl service. He probably would have spent less money overall and gotten more and higher quality sex.
I think some people have ethical hangups about that. I guess I should say, I think a lot of people do. There's a lot of people who are like, if you're having like a political discussion with someone, they'll be like, I think prostitution should be legal. But then if you say, would you ever go to one or act as a prostitute? They're like, oh, no, definitely not. Never. No, I haven't even thought of it. I never would. And I guess I don't know what those people would actually do, but I feel like the hang up is definitely there.
Well, purely from the economic standpoint, he would have been better off.
Yeah, that's what he did, right? Yeah. Well, that's what he did. He just used a really inefficient service, right? Yeah. Actually, I want to hear all these stories.
Oh, boy.
This could just be story time with Craig Hour.
Okay. Liquid nitrogen tires.
This seems like...
Do you know this one?
No, it seems like something I would have heard before, but no.
I swear I've told you liquid nitrogen tires. Okay, so we've talked in previous episodes about the short period of time, this subset of time while I was at NASA that I worked in environmental testing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had all this open loop liquid nitrogen system stuff, and we would run liquid nitrogen through these test chambers, but it was all open loop because we didn't have the ability to refrigerate it again to make it cold. So you'd run it through once, and then we would send it out to this pan on the side of the building. And we called it the flash pan. And it was this big, like, 6 foot long, 3 foot wide, maybe 1 foot deep aluminum tub. And it would just sit out in the sun. And so this liquid nitrogen would just flow into this pan, and it'd be sitting out in the sun in Texas, and it would evaporate. So one day there were several tests running at once in the building, and the test could be very long. Sometimes the test could run for multiple days at a time, depending on what the objective was. And this pan was just receiving liquid nitrogen and receiving it and receiving it. And eventually the whole pan filled up with liquid nitrogen because it just wasn't flashing off fast enough from liquid to vapor.
Wow.
Yeah. The thing about this pan is it was sitting in the grass about 3 feet from a bunch of parking spaces. So it was at the edge of a parking lot in between the parking lot and the building. And when it filled up, it overflowed into the grass. So you had liquid nitrogen just pouring into the grass. And then that just kind of flowed down into the parking lot.
Oh. I would have guessed that it would go into the dirt like water does. I guess not.
It probably froze the moisture that was in the dirt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So then it overflowed the curb and went into the parking lot. And there was a car parked right in front of the flash pan, and it flows around the tires of this car and freezes the tires.
Well, I guess just the bottom. It probably just froze the bottom contact patch of the tire, right?
I guess through the steel belts, it may have cooled off the whole tire quite a bit. I guess the steel belt would have conducted heat away from the rest of the tire.
Yeah. It seems like what would happen is it would embrittle the tire, and
Yes.
then the tire would fail, and you'd get an instant flat.
Oh, we're getting there.
Okay.
Oh, we're getting there. So, at some point, though, you're flowing liquid nitrogen through the grass and onto the parking lot, and eventually you have sufficient surface area receiving liquid nitrogen to flash it off at a rate equal to what the pan is receiving. And so, eventually you maximize how much area of the parking lot is covered in liquid nitrogen, and apparently only one car is affected. So, eventually someone comes in the building and they're like, hey, there's liquid nitrogen pouring under somebody's car out there. And so they go out, they figure out whose car it is, and then they go in, they're like, you probably ought to move your car, I guess, because there's liquid nitrogen pouring under it. And so the guy starts his car, and when he puts it in reverse and then, takes his foot off the brake so it can idle in reverse, the steel belts start to snap because the rubber is basically frozen to the asphalt, and the steel belts start to snap, and he drives around to the parking lot on the other side of the building, and after 20 or 30 minutes or so, basically the tires melted and went totally flat.
Oh, they were kept solid by the liquid nitrogen. Wow.
Yes, because the steel belts were so cold, they were able to stay rigid without the air in them.
But how are they attached to the rim?
Well, the tire was still on the rim. It's just the rubber was all compromised from being embrittled and then rolling.
I'm amazed that tire stayed together while frozen. I would think the second he tried to roll it on pavement, it would be destroyed.
So he drove around to the other parking lot. They thawed out. They went flat. And then the test directors got to buy him a new set of tires.
It's so weird to come in and be like, hey, someone's car has liquid nitrogen under it. Like, NASA problems.
Going along with that was one of the dumber problems I was asked to solve in my time at NASA. Will we suffocate in the high bay? Maybe in the very first month I was working at that job, somebody was going to be doing some demonstration, and they had one of these big, what do you call the big welding bottles?
Gas tank?
There's a proper word for this.
Cylinders?
Yeah, you're getting there.
Pressure vessels?
Yeah, welding cylinder. Okay. So somebody had one of these big welding cylinders full of compressed gaseous nitrogen, and he was going to be doing a demonstration in a high bay of something. I don't know what. But basically he needed to just open a valve and flow this gaseous nitrogen through some apparatus, and then it would spill out after it did its thing and just spill into the high bay.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys were seriously concerned that this bottle of nitrogen could cause enough displacement of oxygen that they would suffocate in a giant high bay. And they wanted, they specifically came over to our group at the Space Center, and they were like, you guys do stuff with nitrogen all the time and atmospheric things and stuff. Are we gonna die if we do this? Are we all gonna suffocate if we just open this bottle and just let it run? Are we just all gonna pass out and die?
Maybe they did the math and they calculated if all of the bottle's volume was instantaneously released, then it would fill most of the high bay.
That's the math I did, though. I took the volume of the bottle at its whatever pressure it was at, and then I said, what kind of volume would that be at standard pressure and temperature? And then I said, it displaces exactly that much oxygen only. It only displaces oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't push out any other nitrogen. And then I said, now what's the new concentration of oxygen in the high bay? And it's essentially unchanged.
Oh, okay. I do like the idea of one bottle, and they're like, can we accidentally destroy the world with this? No. Close, but you're safe.
Something else I noticed is almost all of these stories are from my first job at NASA. There must have been something about that job that lent itself to retarded stories.
I guess the first job was maintaining the vacuum chambers, and the second one was running simulators.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, simulators not. There's no physical way to screw it up, right?
It's like you were saying a bit ago, it's like software. So
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, it crashed a bunch, but there's no exciting failure.
Yeah. The only exciting failures of software are when it's software controlling a real world mechanism.
So in that same job, we had this apparatus called the SATA. It was the Space Station Airlock Training Apparatus. And they would bring astronauts in there and put them in these like special spacesuits that had all of the kind of breathing equipment, but were lightweight so that they could actually move around in Earth's gravity in them. Because a real orbital spacesuit weighs like 300 pounds or something like that. So you can't actually wear it on Earth and move around. So they would come into the SATA in this special spacesuit for use on Earth, and they would learn all the procedure for getting in and out of the space station airlock. And part of the spacesuit is this cooling garment that they wear that has all these little capillary tubes in it that they flow water through. And it's to keep them cool when the sun is shining on them. It tends to absorb a lot of sweat and get kind of gross and stuff. So there was this area in a stairwell in the building that the SATA was in. And it was a huge building. It had like hundreds of offices, and it had a giant high bay with all these other test things and all this other stuff. But just in this random stairwell, in between floors even, there was this landing. And I don't know why the landing existed, because it was in between floors. But they were like, hey, we need a random spot, and here is one. And so they put a washer and dryer there. And it was like, okay, they needed to wash those spacesuit garments. And once in a while, I would go up or down that stairwell, and, once in a while I'd go by and, like, that washer or dryer would be running, and I'd be like, oh, I guess they're just, like, washing that stuff. And then one day, we get this email in the morning about, I don't know, 9 a.m. And it's from my manager, and it's sent to all the people in our group. And the top line of the email just says, if you were washing your laundry in the spacesuit wash machine this morning, please come get your laundry out of director whoever's office and never do that again. If it wasn't you, just click the X and go back to work. And then, like, I read down the email chain, and it was between all the different managers in the building. And apparently, like, someone, they had needed to wash some of these things, like, really quick for a test that was going to happen that morning. But they came in to do it, and somebody's laundry was in the wash machine. They hadn't moved it over to the dryer yet. And apparently there were just a bunch of people who were like, oh, here's a random washer and dryer. I'll just bring my laundry to work at NASA and wash it while I'm at work.
It doesn't really seem like a problem. I mean, it's just a washing machine, right? It's not doing anything special.
They did decide to put a locking breaker on it, though, so they could keep people out of it.
Wow. I don't know. It'd be like if the astronauts were going to do an experiment drinking beer in space, and then they had a space bottle opener just laying around. And you have parties at work once in a while. Someone uses a space bottle opener to open their beer. And you're like, never use the space bottle opener. It's for space only.
I think if it had been my job that day to go into the stairwell and put the garments in there and wash them for the astronaut, and I came across somebody's wet laundry, I probably would have just thrown it out on the floor.
Yeah, that's what I would have done.
And then just put the stuff in there and start washing it.
Well, the dorm room rules are you just take the laundry out and you set it on top of the machine, right?
Yeah.
So what's wrong with that? Why do they have to make a big fuss about it? Just put it on top of the machine. You all went to college, right? Maybe one day in a dorm, you are washing some space garment. Like, it's not even that outlandish. I like how you just have stories about astronauts being stupid There's a lot of that.
So I guess the next one is one, but it's not a first-hand story. It's one I picked up. It happened long before I was at NASA. There's an astronaut by the name of Charlie Bolden, and he was actually the administrator of NASA under President Obama. He was a three-time shuttle commander, I think, and he had been a naval aviator and test pilot before that.
Mm.
On one of his flights, he was on the aft flight deck of the space shuttle, and they're just orbiting the Earth, doing whatever it is they did. And he's looking out the windows into the payload bay, but you know, you can look out those rear windows into the payload bay and also see up into the sky. Your field of view is pretty large.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's got the little radio, you know, so he can talk down to the Earth, and he keys up on it and he says, "Hey, I think there's something out here following us." And you can tell, like, I don't really know what his educational background is. If it's probably engineering, or you know, that's what a lot of those guys, you know, like military test pilots tend to be engineers. And you can tell he has that kind of skepticism where he's like, I don't really believe this is happening, but I'm going to report the evidence that I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. And so the guys, the Capcom on the ground, who is the person who talks, there's only two people on the ground who can talk up to the space shuttle, even though there's a lot of people in mission control sitting around. Mm-hmm. So the Capcom is this other famous astronaut by the name of Story Musgrave. And he responds back up, you know, and he's like, okay. And Charlie Bolden, you know, he goes on for several minutes, and he describes it, and he's like, well, it seems to be trying to signal. I mean, it's flashing a light, and it's probably about 30 degrees off to the port side, and you know, maybe it's 5 kilometers back, and it's just sending a steady flash, and it's just staying directly in formation flight with us. And he goes on, and there's audio of this you can find, and you can tell he's really doing this thing where he is highly skeptical that this is some kind of alien encounter going on, except that it kind of looks like one, you know? Mm-hmm. And so the guys on the ground are kind of like, okay, you know, they're kind of responding and mainly being like, yes, we hear you, you know, copy, or Roger, or whatever. And so it kind of goes silent for a minute, and then he comes back on the mic and he goes, never mind all that. I realized I was just seeing the VCR record light reflection in the window.
I swear I've seen video of that before. Because I think he was recording with a video camera at the time. And it did look very convincing. Because he would move the camera, and the light moved in parallax as if it was very far away. And mm-hmm. It did look like it was coming from somewhere outside of the shuttle, but really is reflected from behind him. And I think he also said it appears to be a red light, and it's blinking at approximately 2 hertz. And I remember when I heard 2 hertz, and I was like, this guy's good at describing things. that's unambiguous.
Yeah. Like I said, almost all of those test pilot guys are engineers. Mm-hmm. They all have that background.
I just don't think I've ever described anything in terms of the hertz that it's happening at. I guess he could have also been like, it's approximately 450 nanometers light spectrum. You gotta tell the light bulb story.
Oh, man. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So this little cube farm area that I sat in my simulation job at NASA, I sat there for a long time. And one day this group of people comes around changing light bulbs, and it's this comedic moment where you actually get to find out how many people it takes at NASA to change a light bulb. And it turns out that it's 5. And one guy has the little gadget that you stick up into the recessed can in the ceiling to grab the bulb and unscrew it and pull it down. But then you have like another guy to just look around and make sure no one's going to run into him while he's staring at the ceiling. You've got a guy with a procedure checklist who's making sure they're following the procedure correctly. You have some kind of manager guy, and then you have like a safety dude who's just making sure everything is being done safely. But it literally does take 5 people to change a light bulb at NASA.
Did all these people show up at the same time?
Yeah, yeah. It was just a pack of 5 of them wearing reflective yellow vests inside the cube farm.
I remember when they came by to change a light bulb for us. I believe first a solo guy came around and he asked us for an inventory of any light bulbs that needed changing. And so we pointed at the one that was out and he was like, yeah, okay. And then I think a day later, 2 guys came back and it was one guy to replace the bulb and the other guy to hold the ladder, I guess. And then after that, I think only one guy came back to confirm that they did in fact get changed and they were now working. So I think we got away with only 4 people, but it took 3 days of process.
Wow. No, this was 5 people all on one day.
Oh, okay. And it was a fluorescent light bulb. You just like pop them out, pop a new one in. You're done.
Yeah. But you had several people that had to come by to fill the hole in your desk.
What? I don't remember that.
The hole from where the hutch had been mounted.
Oh, that sounds really familiar.
Yeah, you said that there had been like a hutch mounted to your desk at some point before you worked there.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were several holes in the desk from the mounting screws. And then somebody came around specifically to take an inventory of all the desks with hutch mounting holes that needed to be filled. And then at a later date, somebody came around to fill all those holes. Instead of just a guy coming around with like a caulk gun or something and looking and being like, let me fill that for you.
Mm-hmm. That sounds familiar, but I don't actually remember that.
Yeah.
I can't believe you remember that.
Yeah.
I wonder how many things happened to me at NASA that I don't remember now. I should have been writing them all down at the time. That's like every story.
No, there's the scratched rental car door.
Oh, I see.
This is at my current job, actually, but it's a good story. So I have to travel anywhere from like 4 to 12 weeks a year for my current job. And I don't really like it. So traveling is really obnoxious for work. And I had to fly to the Virginia, DC area once several years ago. And so I flew into Dulles International Airport. And I went out to get my rental car. And we have special rental car status through our company so that we're not supposed to have to wait. We're supposed to just like walk up to a booth, pick up our keys, and just go to our car. It's supposed to be super fast because they don't want to waste our time because we're billing the whole time we're traveling.
Oh.
So I walk up to that booth and there's this family in front of me. And it's a man and a wife, and they have 2 little kids. And the kids appear to be both probably under 3. And so it takes like 15 minutes for them to get the keys for their car. And there's all these issues because they need to get 2 not high chairs, but car seats. And the rental agencies will provide them if you ask. So they've just flown into, they need car seats. And there was only one person working at the booth, so I just had to stand there and wait for like 15 minutes. So I finally get my keys, but it turns out that my car is like, who knows where. So they're like, we'll bring your car up. And I'm like, I guess I appreciate that. So it takes forever because they have to send some person whose job is to go find cars in a parking garage and bring them here to go find the car. So while he's doing that, that takes probably 10 or 15 minutes on its own. I watch this family that apparently has children, apparently has installed car seats before, and yet has absolutely no idea how to do it. bumble around with installing two car seats in this truck that they've rented while the truck is sitting in the driveway. Like, it's not parked in a parking spot, it's in the driveway. And so they're messing around for like 15 minutes while I'm waiting for the car to get pulled up. So finally, the car gets pulled up. Well, the only empty spot to park it in is wedged in between the parked truck that this family is trying to get the car seats into and this giant support column of the parking garage. And then another car that's parked in the space next to it. And so the dude who went to retrieve the car, he makes this seriously like a 40-point turn to back the car into this spot to wedge it in there. Because I guess the policy is he can't park it in the driveway or something, you know, and just hand me the key or leave it running or whatever and let me get in and leave. So he executes this 40-point turn to wedge the car in. and then he's like, "Have a nice day, sir." And I'm like, "Thanks." So I put my stuff in the car and, you know, I pull up the navigation and I adjust the mirrors and I do all this stuff and I'm watching this stupid family and they're just, you know, it's like, Christ, all you do is you plug the seat belt through the base of the car seat and then you snap the car seat into the base. It's like, it is literally not more complicated than that. That is it. And so I sit there in the car for like 10 minutes and I'm like, what would my life have been like if I had just got into that booth like 30 seconds earlier before that family? I would have been out of here 40 minutes ago. Like, I'd have already been to our subcontractor site, or I could have already been eating lunch or something. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll do my own 400-point turn to get out of this parking spot, you know. And it's, you know, they're parked on the opposite side, the opposite lane of the driveway, but they're right in front of me and stupid support pillars next to me. So, you know, I start trying to wiggle the car out and forward and reverse over and over and over. And, you know, at some point, I'm just like, I think I can make it. And whatever, I scratch the car door against the pillar, the driver door. And I get the car out and I drive around and I don't know, I'm on like the second level of the parking garage or something. I've got to drive down to the bottom level and then you have to go through that gate where they check your driver's license against your rental paperwork to make sure you got the right class of car and that you're the right person anyway. And so I stop before I get to that and I just I take my seatbelt off, I poke my head out the car and I look at where I scratched the car door. And, you know, it's just kind of some paint damage. It's not real bad, and it's not deforming the body panel or anything. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, oh, God, you know, I've already been in here like 45 minutes. You know, my plane landed like 2 hours ago or something, and I'm still at the damn airport. And I hate traveling for work to start with, you know. And so I go ahead, I get back in the car, and I drive down to the booth. And I pull up to the booth and the guy, you know, he opens the little door in the booth and he's like, "Oh, hey, sir, can I have your driver's license and rental paperwork, please?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Is there anything wrong with the car?" And I go, "Yeah, the door is scratched." And he goes, "Really?" And I go, "Yeah, look at this." And I just point down, you know, I don't get out of the car. I just point like out the window down at the door. And he goes, "Oh, man." And he goes, "Let me have that other sheet," you know, and it's the one with like the 5-view diagram of the car, you know. And he like draws the scratch on the driver door on there and then like he circles it and initials it and puts his employee number on it and then gives it back to me. And he's like, "Okay, have a nice day, sir."
Nice.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, that family's just still there.
I bet they are. I bet to this day they're still struggling to install that car seat. The kids have far outgrown it, but they're still struggling.
The kids are all grown. They're like, "Why are we still trying to do this?" They're like, "It's your destiny." I have noticed that a family with 2 kids cannot accomplish any task as fast as I can, ever. It's never happened. I look at them and I think one day that'll be us, unable to leave from any place of business in under 15 minutes. Unable to leave home in 15 minutes.
Do you want to talk about Amazon ice cream?
Sure, I'll try and remember that story. I really didn't remember it until you brought it up. Yeah, so I had this manager at Amazon who, or I guess he was my skip level, so he was the manager of my manager. And he was a really nice guy, he was really smart. But one day, I mean, he did tell us this, we found out later, but he got this idea, hey, I should come up with a fun challenge for all of my indirect reports to do, and it'll be like a good team building exercise and just, fun. And so he left this piece of paper, I think on our desk, or maybe he called a meeting and we went to the room and the paper was there. Actually, I think that's what happened. I think he called a meeting and we went there and there was just this paper. And it said something like, if you can solve this challenge, there is ice cream in a conference room and you can get it. And the implication was the challenge would tell us the room number and building of where that conference room was. And he was like, hurry, it's melting, or whatever. And so he called this at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock one day, I think on Friday. And I was already ready to go. But I was like, oh, well, I'll look at this. And so then we got in there. And the rest of my teammates were all single, so they weren't particularly enthusiastic about getting back home. So they started working on the challenge, and I was like, I have a different idea. So I looked up my manager's personal phone number in the directory at work, and then I called him, and he was like, oh, who is this? And I was like, this is security. You've booked 2 conference rooms, and we have a director level person who's trying to get into one of them. They didn't tell me which room it was, but we need you to unbook one of these conference rooms. And he was like, oh, okay. Which room was it? And I was like, well, we thought that you'd be able to tell us. And he was like, who is this? And I was like, damn it. so then I hung up and then I just went home because I didn't need the ice cream and I wanted to go home. And so then I got back in the next day and he congratulated me in particular on attempting to exploit the weak security of his scheme. Apparently my coworkers did end up finding the ice cream, but I was like, whatever, I could just go home and have ice cream.
When your social engineering attack failed, you decided it was better to just buy your own ice cream.
Yeah. The economics just weren't there. I've never gotten another opportunity to social engineering attack coworkers like that, though. It would be fun.
What did you have to say about deer getting into Johnson Space Center?
Well, people would talk to me about, they would ask me, how secure is Johnson Space Center? And because they have guards and gates and stuff like that, and a fence all the way around the perimeter. But I would always say, it can't be that secure because there's deer there. And if they're not smart enough to keep the deer out, I don't think that they can keep all the people out either. I don't know how the deer got in, actually, though. Just jumping a fence?
They jump over the fence, yeah.
A lot of those fences were pretty high.
Nah, they were just like regular 6-foot fences.
I bet they just found some area that didn't have fence coverage, and they were coming in through there.
No, they just jumped the fence.
How do you know? You never seen the deer jump the JSC fence?
I think white-tailed deer can jump fences.
Okay, that's like every story.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some security intrusion at the Space Center after you had left.
Really?
Several years later. Yeah, there was something happened where there was a guy in some building. He didn't have a badge on. And he had some highly suspicious, like, really poofy coat during the summer. It was like a very thick jacket, and he didn't have a badge. And someone actually challenged him and was like, hey, do you have a badge? And the guy just ran away.
Wow.
And so they called security, and then they activated that, like, site-wide alert system. And they said, hey, everybody look out. There's, some dude fitting this description, and, we're searching, and we've got all the security guys looking because there's some somebody who's apparently unbadged and ran away when challenged. And that evening when we were leaving, they had like 6 guards at every exit, like standing in the roadway, like just looking casually in the cars as they drove by, exiting, trying to see if any of the drivers fit the description.
But they weren't checking people's badges on the way out.
No, they didn't want to inconvenience people that much.
So all the guy has to do is put the coat in his trunk, and he doesn't match the description anymore, and then he can drive out anytime he wants.
Yeah.
He could have lunch in the cafeteria first, then drive out. Maybe go to the gym. I can confirm they didn't check the badges at the gym.
Once they recognized you, they didn't. I'm actually interested if the Fungineering podcast will become cash flow positive before Tesla will.
I think so. I think we can get there. All we need is support from loyal patrons like yourself, listeners. Go get on Patreon. Donate $1. Donate 10. Donate us 1 share of Tesla stock before its value crashes to 0.
If somebody did that, I would sell that thing immediately. So fast your head would spin.
Do you think that the education system in America is perfect?
No.
That's a controversial opinion you have there.
I don't...
I'm pretty sure the majority of Americans, when polled, say, nope, no problems with it. Every other country should seek to emulate the American system.
In fact, they feel they get such a good value that they should be paid more.
But I don't know how much I've actually talked to you about this. What did you think of receiving your education?
At the time or in retrospect?
Both.
I guess at the time I was not cognizant enough of what I should have been aware of to think, oh, I should be getting something else out of this, or this is lacking. In retrospect, I guess it was good enough. I mean, I'm an engineer, and I don't know, my salary puts me in, like, I guess the 2%. So, I guess I did pretty well with my education.
Well, if that's the case, then shouldn't the education system get everyone there? I think this is just outcome bias, and you would have succeeded regardless of the education system.
Maybe so.
I mean, if it's the education system that's getting you there, then all your classmates should be equally successful. But I think we know that's not the case. Yeah, when I was in it, I remember... I feel like my watershed moment came in my freshman year of high school when we were doing story problems about... well, we weren't doing story problems, that's what it was. We were learning about different properties of ellipses. So they have a major and a minor axis and 2 foci and stuff like that. If you can visualize an ellipse, and it has this major axis passing through it, and a minor axis passing through one of the foci... Or no, sorry. The minor axis is the shorter axis of the ellipse. The major axis is the long one. So, but if you imagine a line that's perpendicular to the major axis passing through one of the foci, that's it. It's shorter than the minor axis. So that thing is called the lattice rectum. And I remember making this joke, like, why are we ever going to need to know how to compute the lattice rectum of an ellipse? Or, given the lattice rectum, the area, or anything like that? And I was like, here, let's just make up a story problem. Joe has a swimming pool. He knows the length of the major axis and of the lattice rectum. What is the surface area of Joe's swimming pool? And it's like, Joe's just going to be like, I don't know, it's like 40 feet, whatever. Like, no one's going to ever care about this ever. I was like, you can't even make a story problem about it. That's how little anyone cares. And from that moment, I sort of judged my math classes by how amenable they were to story problems, which was really bad for me because then I went into pre-cal, which is like a bunch of trig problems and infinite series and stuff like that. And it kind of just got worse from there. And probably, I'm guessing you've taken differential equations.
Yeah.
Their favorite story problem is the continuously mixed solution. And That one's. I'm sure it's come up before in like chemical engineering, but as someone who was planning to go into software engineering, it was just pointless. So those story problems always take the form of we have a saltwater solution where it's 10% salt by volume, and then fresh water pours into it at a rate of 1 liter per minute, and the solution is able to drain at a rate of 1 liter per minute, and the tank is continuously stirred, whatever that means. And they're like, what's the concentration over time? And it sort of exponentially diminishes. And like the real answer is you'd find some kind of measuring device that can measure the salt content of water, and you'd just measure it. You like maybe you calculate it in advance, but a lot of times you don't need to. And so the engineering solution's always just you measure it because who cares? And maybe it'll be anomalous in some way, and you'll find out. From that point, I really started feeling like I guess it was just a variant of that. When am I ever going to use this question? And it started feeling less and less like I was ever going to use it. And that only got worse as I went through college. And so I sort of increasingly just felt like I was in some kind of bizarro prison where you were also supposed to learn all this stuff that was never going to have any relevance for the rest of your life.
Your opinion didn't change when you found out that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Oh, I love that. No, no, it did not. Nor when I learned what the Golgi apparatus was, or the Krebs cycle, or the 3 branches of government. Yeah. And I remember also, I had to take an elective science course in college. And so I took geology. I don't know why. And there was this geology lab assignment where you were supposed to learn about the different types of faults that can occur between 2 tectonic plates. And the way they implemented that was you rip these like thick card sheets out of the lab book, and then you're supposed to fold them into 3-dimensional models and like glue them together. So I brought my lab book down to my friend Ted's dorm room, and I was sitting there like cutting and pasting these pieces of paper where we could all look at it and know exactly what it was going to look like at the end. But I had to do it for this assignment. And he was like, "Hey Blake, what are you doing with those pieces of paper?" And I was like, "Ted, college." It was such pointless, stupid work. After we were done with the assignment, everyone got 100 on it or whatever. We all just threw them away.
Do you still remember the different types of fault lines?
Sure. Strike slip faults. Whatever the kind is with subduction.
Subduction.
The other one. The one that makes mountains. Okay, no one cares. Just stop. No one cares. The kind here in California is transverse. It doesn't even matter that I know that and I live almost on top of it. It just doesn't matter. There's nothing I can do about it. So, I mean, it's the same as other things. Like, maybe we talked about this, but I saw this survey that was like, most Americans don't know whether Saturn or Jupiter is closer to the Earth or closer to the sun. And it's like, who cares? No one's going to ever encounter Jupiter in their everyday travels or encounter Saturn and go, oh, I thought this was going to be Jupiter. We've gone too far. Like, it's never going to come up. It just doesn't matter. You learn all these useless things and they're all just signaling like, hey, I know this stuff. And I feel like that's one of the things that really sucks about the education system, because I feel like there's necessary things to learn. Like, an example would be why it's actually really important to get vaccinations and to vaccinate your children. And it's actually really important to wash your hands all the time. And things like that. That are literally life or death knowledge that impacts whether you live or die. And that stuff's always relegated to some health class taught by coach doesn't care. And and it's like one little bit of your entire education. You'll get one of those sometime in high school or something, but you'll get 4 years of English. So you can read novels that nobody needs to read, really.
That you promptly forget.
Mm-hmm. Charles Dickens was paid by the word. And it shows. I really wish education would focus on things that are actually of value. and not on trivia used for signaling. And I also wish it wouldn't try to be so broad. I always hear this trope about well-rounded students, whatever that means. Why does it matter if you know like the history of some country, or if you know about Shakespeare or something like that? It won't ever do you any good. It doesn't matter that you know these things. And the other thing is, if they are useful, you can go learn them on your own. Like, if they're enjoyable to learn, nobody's stopping you, and it only gets easier over time to learn stuff. You can just go to Wikipedia and get this like broad survey of any topic, and it often has a bunch of links, and they'll send you to other places, and you can go to Amazon, you can buy all these books. Like, it's very cheap and easy to learn about stuff. And people who are interested in it, like history or language or whatever, are usually very excited to teach you. And the idea of paying for it and spending a huge amount of time in college just to get that piece of paper, it seems really, really wasteful. And like, as an example of it, just think about how much of that stuff you remember from college. Like, you probably remember taking some physics class and you learn how to solve problems like, what's the focal length of this lens? And I bet you can't do it now.
Yeah.
Or, you know, what happens if this block on an inclined plane does something, and with a spring, probably. Like, you can't remember.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I abandoned grad school. It was the realization that I was going to spend 2 years doing that again so that I could promptly forget it all again.
Mm-hmm.
And then what would I have gotten? Like, most employers would say, oh, I'll credit you like 2 years worth of experience on your salary for that.
That's really generous.
And it's like, okay, I guess.
I haven't even countered that. Also, that doesn't remotely make up for the 2 years of lost income during that time. Like, instead of making money in the real world, you're spending money at college in order to take it and in order to live. And so then you come out minus 2 years of salary, minus the college, and then you get a tiny, tiny pay bump. Like, how long is it going to take to pay that back off? You might not pay it off in your entire working career. So, yeah. Another thing that people will say about it is, well, college, it helps you learn how to learn. I don't really know what that means, because first off, you obviously have the ability to learn, because otherwise, how are you learning how to learn how to learn? But also, people learn no matter what. There's not really a way for anyone to avoid it. Like, just in the real world, you encounter situations and then you remember how stuff went, and then the next time you encounter similar situations, you use your previous experience to address it. That's learning. And so nobody has to teach you how to do it. And I don't remember taking any specific classes in college that were like the learning class, where we're going to teach you how to learn, and they taught me some sort of insightful breakthrough techniques around learning. Here's how to do it faster, or how to retain it more effectively.
But in the business world, you can pay to take all kinds of classes like that.
That's true.
I was walking around at work the other day and I saw this sign. There's this conference room that gets used for all these bullshit classes like that. And there was this sign and it said something like quick problem solving methods class. And it's like, or quick decision making is what it was. And I saw that, and I was on my way to go take a walk or something. And I thought about it for a while, and I ultimately it was like, I'm sure some people are good at making decisions quickly, and I'm sure some people are really bad at it, but I doubt that's the kind of thing you can teach someone. It's something that somebody develops over a long period of time. It's the kind of thing that some people are just naturally better at or not. And some dumb little class is probably not going to be that great for people to improve that ability.
I think I could teach a class on that would improve people's decision-making speed. There's at least a few low-hanging fruits there. Like, let me give you an example. Have you encountered a situation where you feel equally drawn towards two alternatives, and it's really hard to decide between them?
Okay, but I can imagine one. Go ahead.
So, what you should do there is just flip a coin, and then just do whatever the coin says. If you feel really equally strongly about the two things, that means the difference between them is really so slight in your estimation that the outcome doesn't really matter. So just flip a coin and do it. I've actually done this before. Also, if you flip the coin and then you're like, then just do the other thing. Then you get your decision. And I've heard other people espouse that, but just flip the coin and then go with it. And that works. I've used that to pick between which restaurant to go to and things like that, because it just doesn't matter. And so if you just do that and you do that a few times, that would increase your average decision-making speed. So, boom, I just taught you this class.
I think the implication is that these are important decisions that are difficult.
You mean they're not so unimportant that you can use a coin to do it?
No, they're not. And you have to be successful in the outcome.
Yeah.
And in those cases, I think that a class like fast decision making skills is probably a lot of snake oil.
Yeah, well, definitely. Because also, the speed of a decision is not the important part of it. It's usually the quality that you care about. And before that, you would make this other decision where you say, how long should I spend trying to make a quality decision about this? Maybe you want to make that one fast, but because you sort of have to decide how much information you need to make your real decision. That's part of it. But I've talked to people about stuff like that before, and like with lots of different domains of stuff. And usually I say something like, the framework I use for making a decision is, what are your goals? Start with that question. And I feel like a lot of people are stuck right there, just immediately. Like they say, what should I write here? Or what should I build? Or something like that. And I'm like, well, what are your goals? And it's one of the more important steps. Like nailing down your goals in concrete form often informs the rest of your decision making. And I think one of the problems that a lot of middle manager type people at companies have is they don't have very well defined goals. Like corporate might be directing them to care about the customer and, build for the long term and decrease costs and safety first. Yeah. And that never helps because it doesn't inform what trade-offs you're trying to make. And it usually doesn't say this dimension above all others.
Retain top talent.
Like if retain top talent is your only goal, then you should probably like handcuff all your employees down, right? Because damn the consequences. But that's not your true only goal that you're optimizing on. And for a business, it's almost always long-term expected profit. But a corporate value never encodes that exactly. And so a middle manager has to decide how much long-term expected profit should I try for? And then how much other stuff, like political maneuvering, keeping my subordinates happy, like amount of evenings I have to stay late at work. They have to weigh all those things. And they often haven't written down their goals or really thought about them in those terms. And so it's like, if you figure out what your goals are, and then you work backwards from there, and you start saying, like, how do I achieve fractions of my goal in the interim? How do I set myself up to be able to achieve more of my long-term goals in the future? A lot of times, a lot of the decisions just sort of fall out of that. But most people don't even do that first step. It really makes a big difference. If the conference is teaching people that could really help. But it's probably not. It's probably teaching them about coin flipping. But one of the other things that I see not taught by the education system, it's going to sound really silly, but it's how to find out if something is true or not. And I feel like no one ever taught me that. Like that was never a part of any class.
Do you mean just like general logic and philosophical kind of things, or what?
No, like if someone says Elon Musk is going to start the suborbital rocket service that lets people fly around between cities, like, do you just believe it? Or do you not believe it? Like, what do you do? And I feel like no one really teaches the process for how to do that. Or another example would be all the stuff about fake news that people have talked about. Like, some news headline comes out and it says something happened or whatever, and it's like, well, did it? How can I find out? How skeptical should I be? And most people don't have a systemic approach for that, and I definitely don't remember learning anything about that in school. No one was ever like, let's get on a newspaper and try and figure out which things in here are just lies. Because some of them are. Like, some of them are predictions about things that won't happen. I guess they're not exactly a lie. Some of them are straight up lies. It's like someone planting a story for a journalist to talk about, but it's just not true. Some of them are inaccurately reported, things like that. and people always get their news through these filters. And they just, like, from what I have read, I haven't researched this, so I'm not sure if it's completely true, but the way that most people process information, or all people process information, is they just believe it, and then they start being skeptical. So you hear something that's outlandish, and then your brain immediately believes it, and then starts evaluating it. So someone can just be like, I'm from space, and they're like, okay, wait, no, you're not. And you'll just take it for granted, and then you start processing it to figure out if it's true. And so we trust the things that we hear, and we trust the things that we read, and it makes it really hard to be the appropriate amount of distrustful. And I really wish there was some systemic approach in the educational system that taught people how to determine the likelihood of truth.
Yeah.
I think it would be a lot harder to manipulate people, and that would probably be really valuable. It would raise the cost of lying.
Yeah. I think I didn't develop that skill until I started reading a lot of Carl Sagan and Richard Dawkins in my mid-20s.
Wow.
And then I was like, oh, well, especially Carl Sagan, because he was all about that. He was like, you should always be doing that. You should always be asking, like, is this A or B? And how would I tell the difference?
Yeah, but it's easy to tell someone that, and they're like, that's sage advice. And then what do? You have to go out and apply this. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah, you just go out and you apply it a lot, and then it becomes second nature.
I feel like people need practice and a coach. Someone who knows what's going on. They're like, let's practice being skeptical. Today's exercise, be skeptical of 10 things.
Maybe you could put together a set of courses to teach in the corporate world. They'll eat that shit up.
7 Sigma. It's 1 more Sigma than those other scrubs. But, I mean, like, as an example, probably our most popular podcast episode is your Tesla one. And it espouses this really contradictory viewpoint because most people just believe what they read. And you read a bunch of stuff that's just breathless about Tesla and how great it is and how great Musk is and how likely all this stuff is to succeed. And there's a bunch of other, like, satellite topics like, oh, it's important to reduce emissions and electric cars are the future and stuff like that. And so this obviously all ties in. But then you advocated taking a skeptical approach and just saying, well, how are they going to afford to pay for stuff in 2 years? Because they're a company and they'll have to be able to pay for stuff or else they won't be a company anymore. And, like, it sounds really dumb when you put it that way, but most people aren't doing that analysis. Mm-hmm. Most people just think, yeah, like, Tesla is going to be, it's going to be a huge success. We're all witnessing the birth of one of the largest companies ever.
I see them everywhere. They must be incredibly successful.
Yeah. Well, I don't even feel like I was falling for that bias. I was falling for the bias of believing stuff in the news and then never checking any of the financials on stuff. I mean, I didn't care about Tesla as much as you did, but still, I was like, I came into that thinking, yeah, this is probably a bad idea. By the end, I was like, yeah, I think you're probably right. And I was insufficiently skeptical. I feel like that bites people just all the time. Like, in particular with consuming news, that's probably the worst part. When people consume news, they just don't filter anything for truth. And it's the primary way that people get information.
I'd kind of want to do an episode on Hyperloop, except it's been so debunked so thoroughly and spectacularly by better places that I just don't feel like we can do it justice.
Of all the people that I talk to, I don't think any of them are aware of any of these debunkings. I also haven't read any of them.
Do you talk to a bunch of people who think Hyperloop is going to be a thing?
Yeah, they all think it is. They think it's just a matter of time.
Wow. It's that danger because all the technology is feasible, but the economics will never work.
Mm-hmm.
It's so dangerous that even a bunch of smart engineering people at big companies think, oh, this is feasible. And they're not skeptical enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, though, because when you see discussions about it, people who work in, like, the vacuum industry, like, you know, not vacuum cleaners, but like vacuum chambers and stuff.
Yeah.
Those people are immediately like, oh, there's not a chance in hell of this ever working.
Hmm. Well, I mean, it could work if you're just willing to lose a ton of money on it, right?
Like you said earlier, if you only needed it to work once and it never had to show a profit and you never had to pay back the money you spent on it,
Yeah.
then you could probably make it happen one time.
I think that's probably why as far as I know, what they did was announce the concept and then like open up all of the patents on it and then invite people to build it. But I don't think any companies that Musk is running are going to make an attempt at building it.
Yeah, so there are two companies that are really making an attempt at this. There's Hyperloop One, and there's some other company. I don't know the name of it, but
Hyperloop 2.
oh, sucks for them.
I don't know.
They should have been Hyperloop Zero, or really edgy and be Hyperloop Not.
Hyperloop Infinity
Hyperloop Loop.
+1.
But
Mm-hmm.
there are two companies that are really working on this, and it's so depressing because you'll see stuff like their promotional videos where they'll be like, oh yeah, we're doing a test today on a test track, and it's literally like a little model scooter that's like 2 feet long, and it's on like a 30-foot long section of rail, and it's literally just an electric powered scooter on a section of rail, and they're calling that some kind of test of Hyperloop, and it's not in a vacuum or anything. And then they interview some guy, and his title is chief engineer. He looks like he's about 22 years old, and he's talking about how like this is such great technology, it's going to change the world. And it's like, really, have you ever met like a real chief engineer? Like, do you know what that actually means? I mean, it's embarrassing. Like, you feel embarrassed on their behalf
Yeah.
because the entire idea of Hyperloop is so stupid, so infeasible, and just unbelievably dumb.
I was actually just having a conversation with my manager the other day, and I was like, I think it's funny how people say there's ageism in Silicon Valley, because if you've ever worked with any of those like 50-year-old engineer guys, they're always just like uniformly amazing, pretty much. They're like, they just look at a schematic and they're like, oh yeah, I know how that's gonna work, and like they'll have this deep knowledge of embedded systems, or they were a major contributor to the Linux kernel or whatever. Like, they're like someone who was 20 and then they learned 30 years of stuff and then that's where they are now. They're not like someone who was 20 and now they've been on decline for 30 years. It's always like now they just know tons and tons of stuff and they have it all available for recall. And usually as an engineer gets older, they get really, really good at their job and making trade-offs and solving problems without having to think very hard about it.
Yeah.
I still think you could debunk Hyperloop, and I think people would be interested to hear that. Also, I'd be interested to hear it. I haven't done any analysis on it.
I feel like I would just be regurgitating other people's content too much.
People are only allowed to break a story once.
Uh,
No one else is allowed to talk about it after that.
you know, the difference though is that I can't make money off of Hyperloop failing, and I can make a lot of money off of Tesla going bankrupt. And so that's why I'm really interested in Tesla. That's why I keep reading a lot about Tesla on an ongoing basis. There is a lot of money to be made in Tesla going bankrupt.
You need some kind of prediction market.
Yes, if only. A prediction market that was not vulnerable to parasitism.
Mm-hmm. You could just make your own, a new centralized one.